Hi, Jeremy Jansen here, and this is the January 2010 issue of Reason Wizardry. This month we're going to be talking about advanced filtering techniques. It's not going to be the last word on filtering anything in Reason or Record, but it's going to be showing you some really interesting techniques that I've discovered in the course of my Reason work that hopefully will help you with your patches. And it's going to highlight some patches that I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time. All right, before we get into that, there's the patch contest to talk about, or to not talk about. I'm not exactly sure what to say about it, because I didn't get any patches submitted for the contest. And I understand that it's a busy time around Christmas and maybe that wasn't perfect, but I wanted to do this contest for you guys so that you could put some of these techniques into practice. And out of, 75 subscribers, not to get any submissions, I don't really know what to say about that other than that it's definitely your loss for not trying that out. You can only gain by putting techniques that you're learning into practice. So maybe we need to try again with this at some point, but I don't know what else to say other than that. That's that. Okay, let's move on to bigger and better things. Let's get started. So for our first look at advanced filtering, we're going to have a look at 16th Dream from Pantheon 2. Now, this actually doesn't look very advanced. Actually, it's a fairly simple arrangement. We've just got two oscillators going into a single low-pass filter. I'm going to play it for you first so you can hear how it sounds. It's got an inbuilt sequence, which is nice because we can just tweak over top that. So basically what we're going to talk about here is the overdriven filter. In Thor, the filters aren't the same, not the same tone depending on where the drive is. And I've looked at a lot of patches and not many people have made use of this. So when you overdrive the filter, you can get very different sounds than if you've got drive at 64, much tamer. Okay, so in this patch, we're controlling the main dimensions of the filter sound. Everything that you can tweak is pretty much tweakable here. We've got filter frequency, filter resonance. You can hear how the sound changes in an unpredictable way, changing filter frequency. That's because the filter is overdriven. Now let's demonstrate that because we've got filter drive mapped as well. So it's a much more analog, richer sound with filter drive higher. And of course that interacts with the resonance as well. These three knobs interact so much together that you have almost an infinite combination of different sounds between them. But now talking about filter drive, I'd like you to watch the master volume knob as we move filter drive. So we've made a second modulation on filter drive, not only to control the drive slider, but to control the master volume knob. That's because if we just move the drive slider, it gets a lot quieter. So the only real way to map filter drive in a live tweakable way is to simultaneously map the master control as well. We can open up the programmer and have a look. So you can see here, we're mapping filter drive from 64, which is kind of its base value, to 115. And we're also mapping master level to reduce from 115 to 75. So there we're at 64 and we've got our volume boosted. So it's just normalizing the volume as we're tweaking filter drive, and that makes it just incredibly more useful. That's kind of back where we started. Now I'm going to talk about self oscillate. So this little button right here, often you'd expect to use that for, self-oscillating filter sounds so that you can get a sine wave at your filter frequency. But you wouldn't expect to use it in a sound like this where there's not really an obvious resonant peak. But let's listen to the change when we click it. So there's quite a pronounced change that's hard to describe when you change self-oscillate at really high drive. At low drive, it doesn't make much of a difference in a sound like this, but at high drive, it really changes the character of the sound. And high resonance as well. So in this case, you can actually hear with self-oscillate on, it's actually a bit of a tamer sound. So it's an unpredictable control that adds another drive stage inside the filter, to my knowledge. But it's something that you're going to want to experiment with when you've got sounds using high filter drive. And when creating a patch like this, you also need to keep in mind that although you've only got the 4 rotaries up here, you've got your Thor rotaries as well, and to make use of those. And in this case, the filter envelope amount is obviously a really important control to have. We're also running the sound through a wrap shaper that we can control right here. So right at our fingertips, there's a lot of ways that interact with each other to control the sound. Now I'd also like to point out the ladder slope. In this case, we've got a switch that's going to change the ladder slope from 24 dB to 12. So that significantly changes the sound in a way that you might not expect. It's not that much brighter when you switch it to 12. Okay, now that's low drive. What a completely different patch. Now, it's not mapped specifically in this patch, but there's also a really significant difference between the 24 Type 1 and Type 2. Let's see if I can demonstrate that for you. So you can already tell right there it's less bright. I'm going to just change that in our combinator controls here so I can control that from up here. There we go. Okay. So you can hear Type 1 is definitely brighter and has a different character. Now we can switch over to a pulse wave and see how that reacts. There's an even bigger difference in this case. So by showing you 16th's Dream, I hope that demonstrates that even by taking a simple patch architecture, you can generate a lot of different complexities inside that architecture that can be really useful for live tweaking and performance. One of my favorite advanced filtering techniques is Filter FM. I'm sure you've already probably noticed that if you're a Reason Wizardry subscriber for a while now. I did a specific section on Filter FM in our initial July 2009 issue. What I'm going to do now is actually add Filter FM to 16th's Dream and then show you how it can integrate and interact with the other filter controls I've already demonstrated, especially Filter Drive. So let's get to adding some Filter FM to this patch. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is add a third oscillator. We're going to add a sine analog oscillator. And then we're going to go to the mod matrix and add oscillator 3. Going to filter 1, frequency FM. Now let's play that back and hear how Filter FM sounds. So immediately you can hear that there's a whole variety of different sounds from Filter FM. So let's add this to a combinator knob. We're going to add it to knob 4, which previously crossfaded in a vocoder sound in this patch. So we're not needing that right now. So first I'll remove that. And then I'm going to go in and, oh, looks like we have just one slot left here. So we're going to say rotary 4. Goes to mod 3 destination amount. So of course that's the third row in the mod matrix, destination amount. And we want it from 0 to 100. So we'll close the programmer and we'll rename this. So typically with Filter FM, obviously the amount is going to change your sound, but also the tuning of the oscillator. Well, the type and tuning of the oscillator make a big difference. But we don't really have any space available to put a tuning control unless we remove the shaper. Let's try that. Let's change this to FM tuning. And right here, we'll remove rotary 1 going to shaper drive. And we'll replace it with rotary 1 going to oscillator 3 pitch. We'll say at 50 for now. Okay, let's go back and hear this. Okay, we're going to have to adjust that tuning a bit. We'll make it 100. We'll shift it down an octave. Okay, that's much better. So you can hear now between these two new modulations, we've got a very different dimension to the patch we didn't before. So let's play around with it a bit. Let's hear first what it sounds like with low drive. Okay, apparently we have to be a little bit careful in this patch with the higher FM values at low drive. It's a good thing I have a limiter set up. Let's just quickly open up the programmer and change the maximum destination amount to, we'll say 80. That should keep our ears safe. Yep, sounds good this time. So you can hear with lower drive, it's got a more resonant character. Let's turn that up now. So right there, you can hear higher drive values smoothing off the top of the Filter FM sound. Totally different sound with self-oscillation off. In 12 dB mode here, we've got a much thinner sound. It's actually taken away some of the bass on our sound. And we don't have much audible effect from our filter envelope amount. See, that's how we'd expect it normally to sound. So we can use this FM tuning knob to dial in interesting intervals with Filter FM. There's no real scientific technique for finding the exact tuning values to use for Filter FM. Nothing that I've found. You just need to use your ears, tweak it until it sounds good. And there's many different good values hidden. See, that's not bad. Okay, I'm going to save this patch as, a modified version of 16th Stream so you can check it out, make some changes of your own. Of course, there's much farther that you can go with Filter FM. Some things I like to do are using envelopes to control the amount of FM, and then also using envelopes to control the tuning of the modulation oscillator. We just don't have room in our patch to really add that in a controllable way. But with these controls right here, filter frequency, filter resonance, filter drive that's normalized with our master volume, filter FM, filter envelope amount, and our filter FM tuning, wow, that's a really powerful combination that doesn't look advanced or sound advanced at first, but the possibilities are just immense. Now we're going to get really advanced. So I haven't shown this refill much. It's called Filter Research, and I'm going to show you something that comes from filter research. It's called A-plane. And what A-plane is an implementation of the EMU Z-plane filter that was seen in a lot of EMU hardware synths. I believe it was first seen in the EMU Morpheus. So I took kind of the same specification and tried to rebuild something like a Z-plane filter in Reason. So I'm going to first let you hear how it sounds, and then I'll discuss its implementation a bit more. So I've got a drum loop here. I'll just preview it dry first. Okay, now I'm going to turn on the A-plane. Alright, so what a Z-plane filter is, you can Wikipedia it and find out all the details, but essentially what it means is that it's a filter that's tweakable over 3 different dimensions. It's not just tweakable over frequency and resonance. There's a 3rd dimension, which is actually a frequency sweep across the spectrum. Now it's hard to get a picture of this in your mind. I'm going to show you how it works. So first, what the Z-plane looks like is 7 different filters. The first filter is low pass, and it's recreated here with just a simple state variable filter in Thor. And then there are 6 peaks. And we could create those using Thor and bandpass or peaking filters, but I found I got better sound quality and it was more controllable if I used PEQs. It's much easier to visualize when you can see the PEQ shape as well. So with our morph knob, we can tweak over the first dimension, which is frequency, and you'll see what that does. Now it's hard to get this all on the screen at once, but we're also tweaking the frequency of the LP filter down here. Okay, so the second dimension they call transform. It's really resonance. So you're going to see all of these move, and even though you probably can't see it, this will move as well. So it really thins out the sound a fair bit. Okay, and now the 3rd dimension is frequency shift. They may have had a proprietary name for it, I can't remember. Maybe they just called it Z. So what frequency shift does, we can't properly visualize it here, but you have to imagine these EQ bands moving up and down the frequency spectrum all together. So say this peak right here is at 500. Well, it would be shifted up the frequency spectrum all the way to say 1500. So everything moves up and down the frequency spectrum while keeping the same shape and while keeping the same relationship between all the filters. So let's hear what that sounds like. We've also got a button right here for up and down. And that controls whether the frequency shift is going to be up, like I demonstrated, whether this will go from 500 to perhaps 1500 or whatever, or whether it's going to go from 500 to say 125. So let's click it down. So for the rest of the controls, basically I've set up LFOs that can modulate each one of these parameters. Just to add some motion to the sound, but you could really do anything with them. The fourth knob is a vocoder, but it's not really relevant to what we're talking about today. So now I'm going to show you how these modulations have been achieved. Just turn off our drum loop there for a moment, get some breathing room. So for the morph, we do that exactly how you'd expect. If I open up the programmer here, for rotary 1, we've got filter A and B mapped to different values. And we've got that for each one of the EQs. So exactly where you want the frequency knobs to start and end, you just map in the combinator. Couldn't be really any more simple. And it's the exact same thing for transform. We just set the start and end Q values exactly where we want. And there's no science for this. EMU had specific filter shapes. I never emulated those exactly. You can create a whole variety of resonant and filtered shapes using this technique, and I don't really feel one is better than another. You can just experiment and find useful sounds using your own values. Of course, you can start with A plane because this patch is going to be provided for you. Of course, the morph knob also controls the low pass filter in the Thor. You can see right here, rotary 1 going to filter 3 frequency and resonance on rotary 2. Okay, where it gets more complex is the frequency shift knob. How can we shift these entire filter shapes up and down the frequency spectrum without changing their relationship? Well, this is how I figured to do it. We're going to use this Thor to output a CV value. Now it's going to be a constant CV value coming just from rotary 1. So, it's going to be a value from 0 to 127. And it's going to be output from CV out 1. And you can see that going into the splitter here. Sorry, the splitter right here. And then it's going to be split 6 times going into the CV inputs on the back of each EQ. Basically, what that allows us to do is shift everything up or down the frequency spectrum depending on the setting of this rotary. So what we're doing is actually just adding the rotary 1 value to frequency. So that's going to shift each frequency up the same amount depending on what rotary 1 is set at. And as far as shifting it down, if we click the up-down button, we just reverse the modulation destination amount to -100 instead of 100. So that'll shift things down instead of up. So let's hear that one more time, and I'll just describe how it works again. So we've got our morphing, which is set up in the combinator controls right here, as well as morphing the low pass filter. Then we've got our transform, morphing the Q values here. And we've got our frequency shift, which is going to change rotary 1 and move these shapes up and down the frequency spectrum. I'm going to just load up B plane here, although this one isn't going to be included, just to give you a demonstration of what different shapes you could create. You can see here this looks totally different. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that for the Z-plane filters. You've got A plane to work with, so you can modify that and create an infinite variation of Z-plane filters for yourself. To finish off our look at advanced filtering techniques, we're going to check out the fixed filter bank, which is a patch by myself for filter research. The fixed filter bank is one of my favorite patches that I've ever created, and it's also one of the most complex. For that reason, I've always been a bit hesitant to bring it into Wizardry because it's just so complex. I'm afraid that I might not really be able to go as in depth to show how it works as I want to. But I think you guys are at the level where it should be all right to definitely give you an overview how it works. So let's get started. I'm going to preview our drum loop dry first. Now we'll bring in the effect. Okay. So first I'm going to just describe the inspiration for the fixed filter bank. And that's a hardware synthesizer made in Germany called the Spectralis. You may have heard of it. It has a filter bank inside that I've never used myself, but I certainly would like to. But in the meantime, what I've done is read the specifications and tried to recreate how it works and the theory behind it in Reason. And from the sound demos I've heard of the Spectralis anyway, this comes fairly close. So first let's look at the controls. We've got stretch, peaks, sequenced, non, high pass, formant, and then we've got some other controls I'm not going to discuss. They're kind of ancillary to our purposes here. Okay, so stretch. It's a subtle effect, but what if we turn up peaks a bit? So what we've got here is a bank of Thor filters. It's 10 filters, starting with a low pass, 8 band passes, and finally a high pass or formant filter on the top end. All these filter signals are being inputted into this mixer. This is kind of similar to the audio and CV processing issue, where you can split up a sound into different frequency bands and then mix it by panning those bands in different places, affecting them separately. So you can see I've already done some of that here. Okay, but what the controls do, stretch tunes all the filters lower, and peaks turns up the resonance on each filter. But not only does stretch tune each filter lower, it stretches them out so there's more space in between them. It's not like the Z-plane filter where the relationship between all filters is kept. Instead, the relationship is changed and they're either pushed together or stretched apart. And I'll show you how that works. So let's open up the first bandpass Thor filter here. You can see every filter is a state variable bandpass. And rotary 1 is what's controlling the stretch. And in this case, we've got -40. And on the next Thor, we've got -45. And on the next Thor, -49. So it's not the same every time. If we used 40 on all of them, then the relationship between the filter's frequencies would be maintained. But we want them to be different, because that's how the Spectralis works. Okay, so you get that hopefully. So you can feed anything into the fixed filter bank and get something useful just by playing with these two knobs, and of course the HP formant knob. Usually moderate peaking values are best so you don't have that really distinct pitched sound. Okay, so that's the basic way to use fixed filter bank and how it works. Now we're going to look at the sequenced control. So now you've got the basics of how the fixed filter bank works. Now we're going to move on to using it in a sequenced fashion. And this is what's really special about the fixed filter bank, both as this patch and in the Spectralis synth. Basically what we can do is sequence the gate on every filter. So we can create filter sequences that are comprised of all the different filters. The best way to understand this is just to hear it. So you can use any input to create a sequence like this, but it's best to have something sustained. So I'm going to start out with a most simple option, which is just some noise. So we'll just hear that first. It's coming from a Thor down here. I'm going to save this whole RNS for you. Okay. So there's our noise. Now let's turn on the effect. I'm going to turn up the volume a little bit inside the effect. So you can see what's happening here. In a rhythmic fashion, these different filters are being triggered. And that's what all the matrix devices in between each Thor are for. They can all be running in different amounts of steps, different timing, different velocity settings, so it's really flexible. Let's just change that top formant sequence. And of course, the stretch and peaks are even more prominent in this mode. So remember, this is just white noise. Let's add some delay. Okay, now let's try it with a different source. I've loaded a patch here from Pantheon 1 called The Nothing. So we're going to use that as the sound source instead of the noise. I guess we should probably hear it dry first. So it's a long, sustained, atmospheric sequence by Adam Fielding. All right, let's chop that up. So now I'm going to open up one of these Thors. Well, let's start with a low pass. Of course, we can control the type of gate that the matrix is sequencing by using the amp envelope. So I could make it a much more sustained bass note that's coming from this low pass filter. Or very quick and snappy. And of course I can use the mixer here. I think it's a little bit too much high end, actually. So I could use it just like that instead. And continuing on from our audio and CV processing, obviously I can do whatever I'd like for each channel here. So for this bass, which is coming from the low pass filter, the lowest filter band, I could insert a scream 4. And maybe change the sequence. So I've made a few further tweaks here. I increased the sustain of the final band. Gives almost a high hi-hat-like effect. So I'm going to leave it there for you. Save the patch. You can continue on with it. I hope you found this issue of Reason Wizardry useful. And I hope to take Reason Wizardry to even more complex and interesting places in 2010. So thanks for being here with me, and I'll see you next month. This is Jeremy Jansen. Cheers.